We are so privileged to have a set of dynamic panelists joining us to emphasize the importance of diversity and representation of all children and families in books. Our panelists have incredible stories of their own, and I can't wait for you to hear from them in just a minute. We'll be utilizing the chat feature as part of the Q&A with our panel, so I encourage all of you to jump in there and ask your questions from this powerhouse team while we have them. I'll be monitoring that. I'm going to turn the moderation over to Angela, and I'll be back when I surface your questions. Mimi, Bear, Mina, and Xena, thank you all for joining us today. We are thrilled that you're here. I'm going to turn this moderation over to Angela, and as I do that, I want you each to introduce yourselves, share some thoughts about why diversity in print matters to you. Mimi, can you start us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Mimi Dixon, and I am Director of Brand Activation and Content at Crayola, and I've been there for almost 7 years. I would say why diversity and inclusion is important in literature, but also in general, I would say education is around, and I would say is really focused on inclusion and representation and making sure our children, as well as parents, see themselves represented throughout books, education, literature, movies, toys, you name it. It is all about kind of seeing ourselves and making sure that we're represented and included.
Thanks, guys. Anybody could pick it up, or why don't we, you know what, why don't we go in my order on my screen? Bear, why don't you take that question next? Introduce yourself, talk a little bit about why this is important to you. Bear, I'm wondering if you're muted.
Is that any better?
That is
Can
perfect.
you hear me?
Starting over.
There's a
Yes.
long, sorry, there's a long delay, and so I muted in order to not hear the delay. I'm sorry. My name is
No
Bear
worries.
Bergman. I'm the founder and publisher of Flamingo Rampant. We make feminist, culturally diverse picture books that celebrate lesbian, gay, bi, queer, trans, and two-spirit kids and families and communities. I really want to echo Mimi Dixon's comments about the importance of representation. There are kids who go a very long time without ever getting to see themselves and their experiences and their reality reflected in a book. And I also want to say that I think it's very important for young people to be able to see themselves reflected in a positive, beautiful, loving way. I think that a lot of efforts at adding diversity to books tend to focus on identity as problem narratives. And I'm super excited about all of the books and other educational materials that show kids from all kinds of families and all kinds of communities shown as being well and happy and loved and getting to do kid stuff like having adventures and solving problems and making mistakes and relying on each other. So I think, you know, having the opportunity to talk about it today really gives us a way to dig into some of the crucial reasons why that's important for every kid.
I love that. I love representation, and not just representation, but positive representation. So thank you both for that. And last but not least, Mina and Xena, can you just introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about why this work is important?
Hello, I'm Xena.
I'm Mina.
We started the nonprofit organization Girls of the Crescent, where we collect books with female Muslim main characters and then donate them to schools and libraries. For us, we're both Muslim women, and the character was about 2 or 3 years ago. And the sense of belonging we got from reading that book was so incredible. We realized that we had to make sure that the other kids, younger kids, got to feel that. Anything else?
Yeah, just to add on, it's definitely important to have positive representations of people's cultures and traditions and religions, because we're avid readers, and usually whenever you see like a Muslim portrayed in the media, it's a negative representation. And when we were younger and when we saw that, it definitely has a negative impact on how we viewed ourselves. So it's just really important to have these positive stories.
Agreed. Thank you both so much. And before we even move on from here, I just wanted to make a quick announcement that Mina and Xena and their organization, Girls of the Crescent, are actually donating 100 books to Lehigh Valley Reads for our Build a Library, Build a Future campaign. It's our first, or technically our first donation. So I just wanted to, make a quick shout out and thank you both for your generosity. It's really appreciated. So I want to move on a little bit. So can you all go a little deeper into what you or your organization is specifically doing to make sure that more children see themselves in their family structures reflected in books, toys, or educational materials? You could just, even if it's just one example that you want to share. And this time, let's start out with Mina and Xena this time.
Yeah, so what we do is we collect books with female Muslim main characters and donate them to schools and libraries. We started off by researching different books and looking at reviews from teachers and librarians. And then we compiled them into a list of books. We started off with 40, and now our list has books from that list, and then we reach out to schools and libraries, or sometimes they reach out to us, and a lot of collections. So sometimes they just collection, which we think is amazing.
Thank you. Definitely amazing. Mimi, do you want to pick up that question next?
Sure. I would say, so going back and heralding back to the message around diversity and inclusion, the way Crayola looks at it is a three-pronged approach. So first and foremost, it's about people. So making sure that we're hiring the right people, we have the right people in the organization at the right levels. And then also making sure our employees feel like they can bring their best selves to work and do their best work every day. That's first and foremost. Second, I would say business. So this is making sure that we are being trained. We have the education of trends that are happening in diversity and inclusion. We are having diversity of thought so that we have different team members and cross-pollination across our projects, innovation. And then last but not least, and I'll talk about this briefly, is Marketplace. So we launched last year an exciting new product, and it is called Colors of the World crayons. And what that is skin tone crayons. And I know, skin tone crayons have been on the marketplace for a while. Actually, Crayola launched multicultural crayons back in 1992. These are different. So what we did was partner with beauty. So reached out to a chemist from MAC. Also, this individual has a lot of, I would say 30 years of experience in beauty. So you think about foundations and the number of tones that you have for foundation. So what we did with, his name is Victor Casal. So what we did with Victor is took 40 beauty foundation colors and translated that into 24 crayon colors. So a lot of technical things happened there, but what the whole premise of that product was about representation and making sure that kids could pick up a crayon. I would say even before grabbing a book, right, kids are drawing themselves, that are drawing lines and need to see themselves in that artwork. So making sure that there were a number of shades where kids could pick up a crayon and draw themselves. And as you think about our world as becoming more diverse with each generation, you may be in a family that's blended. And so mom may be one crayon color, dad another, your brother and sister another. So we wanted to make sure that we were able to represent that within one crayon box. and it is for everyone. So the 24 colors represent the 40 different shades, global shades in the world.
Thanks so much. We're big fans. We have our box. Kids got them for Christmas, so thank you and thank Crayola. So last but not least, Bear, do you want to tackle that question? So just maybe something specific that you or your organization is working on to ensure representation?
Sure. Although immediately after this, I need to order those crayons for my kids. That sounds amazing. We are particularly focused on own voices, work, and writing at Flamingo Rampant. The Cooperative Center for Children's Books at the University of Wisconsin keeps a great list and puts out data every year about diversity and representation in children's books. And when we started, what we saw was that a very small number featured kids, families, and communities of color. And although that number has been ticking up, which is great, the number of people of color, people with disabilities, LGBTQ people who are writing and illustrating the books isn't going up nearly as fast. And for us, it feels absolutely crucial that we are, as Mimi said, hiring and in some cases scaffolding people into being able to write a children's book or illustrate one from their own experience, something that they've lived, that they know about, and that they can present to readers who may recognize it as their own experience or may just really be able to connect with an authentic and emotionally personal representation by someone for whom it's their own lived experience. We've been sort of at that since we started Flamingo Rampant in 2012, and it's been incredibly valuable to see the responses from people who are able to recognize when a book is being written by someone who actually does share their experience.
That's great. It's fantastic. So thank you. And Bear, I think let's stick with you for the next question. So can you tell us about the first time you saw yourself reflected in a story and why it was important to you?
It was a very long time in my childhood before I saw any character that was even a little bit like me. As a Jew, I didn't really have children's books that reflected my Jewish experience. There were a lot of books about Christmas and one or two about Hanukkah, but very little or nothing that showed me Passover, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Shabbat, or any of the holidays that we celebrated or observed at my house. And also, I'm a transgender person, and though at the time people understood me as a girl child, I was definitely not the kind of girl that I saw in most of the books that showed girls. So probably the first book that had a kid that was even a little bit like me would have been Harriet the Spy by Louise Fitzhugh, which showed a sort of nerdy, curious, stubborn, and fairly backtalky girl. And I was probably 10 already by the time I got to that book. It was a long wait.
Great. Thank you. That's also a favorite in our house too. I have 3 girls, so you can imagine they're all Harriet the Spies in some way. Mina and Xena, do you want to tackle that question? When the first time was when y'all saw yourselves represented in a story, and why you thought it was important.
Yeah, so Xena touched on this earlier, but the first time we read a book with a character like us was about 2 years ago. It was when we read The Lines We Cross by Renda Abdel Fattah. And it's kind of hard to describe what we felt when we read it, because it was like a decade, more than a decade that we just like the vague fact of that, but there were also like small details that fact that the character's name was Mina. That was the first and only time that I've ever seen a character have my name in a book, or the fact that the Middle Eastern food, or goes to the mosque. Just those small details were stuff that really connected with us, and it's really hard to explain the feeling of amazement and excitement that we felt when we read it.
Definitely powerful. Thank you. And Mimi, how about you?
Sure. So Mina, first thing I want to say is my sister's name is Mina. So my mom actually let me name her at 9. So Mina's been around for about 40 years. So you're in great company there. I would say my first experience of seeing myself represented in stories was really, I'm thinking as a child growing up during Black History Month. And that was like the time where that was our representation, where you could talk about, Black people. And it was for that month. And I think the challenge there is that it was just that month, 1. 2, it was, I would say, kind of slavery focused, if you will, and past focused versus what was happening currently. I think you said something that was very key, Bear, which is about positive, beautiful, loving stories. And so those weren't there. It was more about historical facts about what has been, which is great. But it's what we have to have that inspiration. We need to know kind of what's coming, like what's happening now, and what we can look forward to. And that's really what was missing. More recently, we have a lot more of that, but definitely I would say through elementary school and middle school, it was all Black History Month historical in the past.
Thank you. So even, building upon this further then, how are you, again, personally or professionally, making sure that books or, the products that you make or distribute are actually, relevant to your own experience? And let's start with, we'll start with Mina and Xena.
Yeah, so whenever we add books onto our list of books with female Muslim main characters, we always make sure to do a great amount of research beforehand. We read a lot of credible reviews to see like what the representation is like, and we've omitted books from the list because of the stereotypical or negative ways that they have portrayed the Muslim characters. And we try to actually read a majority of the books that we donate. We've read like a majority of the picture books because they're shorter, and we're working on reading the young adult. Something that we would want to see that have actually read the books, like if
Thank you. And how about Mimi?
Sure. So I would say with the launch of Colors of the World, so kudos to Crayola for allowing just kind of stopping and listening. So I felt like we had an opportunity with this launch. It's not about a product. It is about the larger notion of diversity and inclusion. And so I was able to kind of infuse my own personal experiences, if you will, with diversity and inclusion or lack thereof to help co-lead this project. And I think because of that, you have a product that is more authentic, that is more transparent, that is more credible, and I think definitely relates, I would say, more to the population. So kudos to Crayola for that. Secondarily, I am chairing our Inclusion Council. So back to that people and hiring and making sure that we're bringing our best self to work. So how do we infuse diversity and inclusion throughout the organization? And not just myself, but other fellow Crayolians bringing that together to bear as well. So I would say secondarily that. And then last but not least, because I'm in our marketing communications group, so a lot of what you see out in the marketplace kind of comes from my group. Making sure that we have inclusion and diversity within that. So whether it is a social post or whether it is advertising or whether, it is a national marketing campaign, making sure that we are, one, including everyone, making sure we have, that diverse representation, not only from within the activation, but also who we're speaking to as well.
Great, thank you. And Bear, how about you?
I'm just really reflecting on the fact that all three of us seem to have started or worked on the initiatives that we're working on in part because of our own experiences feeling like what we needed when we were young people or what our children needed wasn't there for us, which is a large part of how we started Flamingo Rampant as a press in the first place. So we produce books in seasons of 6. It's like a box set, although they come in a cute tote bag, not a box. But when we started, we just made a rule that half or more of every season had to feature or center kids and families of color, and that at least one book out of every season had to feature kids with disabilities, and that all of them would show LGBTQ kids and families and communities, and that we would never publish books where the primary storyline was about harassment, bullying, ostracization, kids being made to feel bad about their identity or their family or their community. And for us, it's been a very healing opportunity, not just for the people who work with Flamingo Rampant, but for a lot of people that we that read our books and write in. The letters that we get are amazing, and sometimes we get letters in crayon, which is absolutely the best part of the job.
Great. Thank you. I'm actually seeing that we're getting quite a few questions coming in from the chat. So I'm going to start to field some of those. So what is one first step or next step you would encourage literacy advocates on to call to take to advance diverse literacy? So again, what is a first step or a next step on how you would encourage literacy advocates, like myself, to call on or to take or to advance diverse literacy in our communities? And let's start with Mimi this time.
The first thing that I would say, Angela, is to speak out. I think a lot of times why we're in a situation that we're in is because of silence. And whether that's because we're the only person in the room, we're not in the room, we feel that our point of view is not going to be taken seriously. I think we're passionate about it. It's burning inside of your soul. And you know that this is what we need. My recommendation would be to speak up. And I mean, the worst that can happen is that at this time you have an organization that's maybe not ready, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. So I would say continue that, making sure that you have the research to back it up. And then there's always allies to help you with that. So, I mean, even with Colors of the World, I would say, going to an organization and saying, hey, time out, this is a little bigger, than a product. We're getting into, this is a diversity and inclusion and representation. And this is a lot bigger than just colors and crayons. And, having an organization stop and listen, that was a chance, right? And it was a good one though. And we're, in a great place. And I would say, servicing so many kids that have written in and said, thank you so much. We've needed this. We've been waiting for this. This should have been done like years ago. And so I would say, speak out. What's burning, just make sure that you're speaking it out. And that it's being known of what we need to do. Because I would say oftentimes there's not knowledge of what needs to be done and why, because it's just not in their realm of reference or frame of reference, honestly.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I just want to say before we end this panel that I love that the word activation is in your title at Crayola, and definitely fits who you are and what you're doing. So thank you. So let's move on. So Bear, do you want to take a shot at that question?
I'm a big fan of presenting people with the data that will help them to make a better decision. And a lot of times that's just counting. I was a liberal arts major. I got a degree in poetry and creative writing. It's not like major research skills are needed, But I find that very often people are not aware of what their book collection looks like when you show them a simple count. You know, go to a school or a library or whatever organization you're personally concerned with diversifying and count. How many of the books show kids and families of color? How many of them show queer or trans characters? How many of them show people who use assistive and mobility devices? And then, you know, present the data and then keep presenting it, right? Like, do the count every 6 months and let them know, oh, we're seeing a little bit of progress. And also, you know, we have 87 books about trucks and only 2 books about Native American people. That maybe something, that's maybe something that we would like to talk about when the budget is released. You know, trucks are great, but also there are places where, you know, nothing's happening, and we need people, when they can see by the numbers and by the percentages what a collection looks like or what a year of school assignments looks like, sometimes it helps them to feel more motivated to make change.
Absolutely. Thank you. And Mina and Xena, want to tackle that question?
Yeah, so as a part of several different diversity groups, something that I always push for is involving students and youth in your activism and in your advocacy, especially when it comes to literacy-focused projects. Have to do with students, have to do with youth, and directly impact them. So something I always say is if students are being directly impacted, then they should be actively involved. So reaching out to students and asking them what they feel is needed in their libraries. If you're starting some sort of project, having students helping out, their voices should be included just as much as any adult voice. And as students ourselves who started a project, we know that the students are just as capable of creating real change. So we really advocate for that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for sharing different perspectives and very eye-opening. So appreciate that. We're going to move into another question. We are coming up around the 5-minute warning, so we'll try to get in as much as we can. But I did want to at least take one more question from the chat. So if you had to, you know, tell our audience members, you know, one thing that you hope that they take away with them from this panel discussion today, what would that be? And let's start with Mina and Xena this time.
Yeah, so I don't know how many of the people in the audience are students or how many of them have students as children, but something that we think is really important is, again, like student involvement and valuing student voice. We are just as capable of creating change as any other person. Just because we're young, we might be underestimated, but that should not be the case. Sorry, I was just reading the chat. Yeah, we think that students should be uplifted and youth voice should be uplifted, especially when it comes to literature, because it shapes our identity a lot and how we see ourselves in the world.
Thank you. And before I move on, so if you can just right off the top of your head, your favorite last read, if you want to share with us quick.
Yeah, I actually just read The Light at the Bottom of the World. It's actually one of the books on our list. It features a female Muslim main character. It's a sci-fi fantasy young adult novel, and it's a really great read. I actually read it because it's one of the books for our district's Battle of the Books, where students get together and read books, and then we have a trivia night. So yeah, The Light at the Bottom of the World is a really good read.
I think my absolute favorite book is the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I've read it like 6 times maybe. So it's definitely like a recent read because I just keep rereading it. A lot of the stuff he says is just so inspiring, and he isn't a Muslim woman, but he is a Muslim man. And so I get to connect with that a little bit.
Great. Thanks so much. We're going to move over to Bear. Again, quickly one key takeaway for folks, and then your favorite last read.
I want to quote a brilliant educator, Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, who has written that in the hands of a child, every book is either a mirror or a window. And I want to, and she talks about the fact that that book is either a mirror that shows a kid their own experience reflected, or it's a window that allows a young person to see into someone else's experience. And I love how simple and straightforward that concept is. And I really want to encourage parents and educators to look at the books that they choose for their homes or their classrooms through that lens. If this book is a mirror, what are you reflecting back to your children or your students? And if it's a window, what are you opening up for them to be able to look through and see? My last favorite read, I recently read Crosshairs by Catherine Hernandez, which is brilliant. She's brilliant. That's an amazing book.
Identify as minority. And so that is huge. Our world is moving toward being more diverse. So that means it is a must that we be more inclusive. It's not a choice, it is a must. So that's, I would say, is the key takeaway. And then my latest book, I had to actually pull it up because I wanted to make sure I got the author right. So I have it right here on my phone, is Fear is Not the Boss of You. And this is how to get out of your head and into the life you were made for. It's by Jennifer Allwood. So love one, that she's a female, love that she's Christian. So from that standpoint, from diversity and inclusion, and it is all about kind of women getting out of our heads so that we can be successful in whatever it is that our God-given talents. So that's the last book that I've read that I thought was very dynamic.
Great. Well, thank you. Thank all of you again on behalf of the Lehigh Valley Reads team, our amazing and diverse community here in the Lehigh Valley. It was a real honor to be with you all today and help moderate a wonderful discussion. So many thanks.